My name is Jhon, and welcome to Plane Crashed, where we uncover the haunting truths and untold stories behind history's most tragic aviation disasters. Every piece of wreckage tells a story. Every black box whispers the final seconds of human courage and mechanical failure. In this episode, we dive deep into the world of general aviation, where small aircraft meet big consequences. From pilots who faced impossible odds to investigations that changed flight safety forever. We'll journey through two defining incidents. The mysterious crash of John F. Kennedy Jr.'s Piper Saratoga and the tragic 2014 crash of the Gulfstream G-IV at Hanscom Field. On the evening of July 16, 1999, the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Martha's Vineyard became the final resting place of John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn Bessette, and her sister Lauren. What was meant to be a short, private flight aboard his Piper Saratoga 2HP turned into one of the most haunting tragedies in modern American aviation. The flight had all the elements of a routine trip. Clear flight plan, experienced, albeit non-instrument-rated pilot, and a sleek six-seat aircraft built for comfort and reliability. Yet what unfolded over the next few hours was a slow-motion descent into confusion, darkness, and ultimately silence. John F. Kennedy Jr., the son of a president and the embodiment of American legacy, took off from New Jersey's Essex County Airport around 8:38 p.m., bound for Martha's Vineyard. It was a calm summer night by most accounts, but the weather near the coast was far from ideal for visual flight. A thick haze blurred the horizon, blending sea and sky into an indistinguishable grey void, a trap that has claimed the lives of many pilots flying under visual flight rules. Kennedy had logged over 300 flight hours, but his experience in night and instrument conditions was limited. That night, his decision not to file an instrument flight rules plan meant he would rely solely on what he could see, a decision that would prove fatal. As the aircraft climbed out of New Jersey airspace, radar data showed a smooth and steady ascent, holding course along the Connecticut coastline. Kennedy communicated with air traffic control briefly, but made no distress calls. As the Saratoga crossed over Rhode Island toward Martha's Vineyard, the sun had long set, leaving only the faint glow of the moon behind the clouds. Below him, the ocean stretched out endlessly, offering no lights, no horizon, no sense of direction. It was here, in this featureless blackness, that spatial disorientation began its cruel work. Spatial disorientation is a silent killer in aviation, especially in general aviation where many pilots depend heavily on visual cues. Without a clear horizon, the human brain becomes unreliable. The inner ear, which helps us sense balance and motion, can create illusions, making a pilot believe the aircraft is level when it's banking or climbing when it's actually descending. Kennedy, flying without an instrument rating, would have had to trust his cockpit instruments completely. But trusting numbers over instinct is one of aviation's hardest challenges, even for seasoned pilots. Investigators later determined that as Kennedy approached Martha's Vineyard, his aircraft began to descend erratically. Radar recorded a series of turns, climbs, and sharp dives. The Saratoga was entering what's known as a graveyard spiral, a deadly loss of control that feels deceptively stable to the pilot until it's too late. Within moments, the aircraft plunged into the Atlantic Ocean at a high rate of speed, disintegrating on impact. The Coast Guard initiated a massive search after Kennedy failed to arrive at his destination. The world watched as search teams combed the waters for 3 long days, clinging to hope that somehow the young couple and Lauren Bessette had survived. But hope faded when wreckage was discovered roughly 7.5 miles off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. The bodies were later recovered, still strapped to their seats, a haunting image of how sudden and final the end had been. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation was exhaustive. They found no signs of mechanical failure, no evidence of engine malfunction or control issues. The Piper Saratoga had been airworthy and well-maintained. The cause, investigators concluded, was pilot error brought on by spatial disorientation in night conditions over water. It was a tragic but textbook example of what happens when visual flight meets deceptive darkness. The report also highlighted other contributing factors: Kennedy's limited experience with complex aircraft, his recent ankle injury, which may have affected his training schedule, and the subtle but immense pressure he faced that night. He was flying to attend a family wedding, with high expectations to arrive on time. Witnesses said he seemed tired but determined. In aviation, such human pressures can quietly override caution. Pilots often underestimate fatigue, overestimate their abilities, or feel an unspoken push to continue rather than delay. The Kennedy crash encapsulated that deadly mindset known as get-there-itis, a term used by aviators to describe the dangerous determination to reach a destination at all costs. To the public, the loss of John F. Kennedy Jr. was more than another aviation tragedy. It was the end of a mythic American chapter. The young man, once called America's Prince, had inherited both the charisma and curse of his family's legacy. His death reignited public fascination and sorrow surrounding the Kennedy family's so-called curse. But for pilots, it served as a sobering reminder that physics and perception spare no one, no matter their name or lineage. Aviation experts use the incident as a teaching case for spatial disorientation awareness, particularly in the context of night flying. Flight instructors across the country began referencing Kennedy's flight in classrooms, emphasizing how quickly visual cues can vanish over water and how rapidly a pilot can lose control without realizing it. In simulator training, new pilots learned how to recognize and recover from graveyard spirals, using Kennedy's radar data as a reference for how such disorientation manifests. The NTSB also encouraged broader awareness about weather interpretation, risk assessment, and the importance of instrument training, even for private pilots. Behind the investigation, however, there was a more human story, one of love, ambition, and fragility. Jhon had been deeply passionate about aviation. Friends described how his face lit up when talking about flying. He viewed it as freedom, a way to escape the constant glare of fame. The skies gave him solitude, a space where he wasn't a Kennedy, just a pilot. Yet that very freedom demanded respect for nature's indifference. The sea and sky don't care who you are or what your last name is. They demand humility, precision, and preparation. In the days following the crash, tributes poured in from around the world. News outlets replayed his last known movements, interviews, and flight training clips. There was an eerie poetry in how his life mirrored his father's, a sudden, shocking loss that once again left America grieving a Kennedy gone too soon. For pilots, though, the tragedy was less about legacy and more about learning. They dissected every detail: his decision to fly at night, the lack of an instrument flight plan, his inexperience with haze conditions, and the psychological factors that cloud judgment. Each element became a line in aviation safety manuals, a reminder that flying is as much about discipline as it is about passion. Decades later, the crash remains one of the most studied in general aviation history, not because it was extraordinary in mechanics, but because it perfectly illustrated how ordinary decisions can chain together into disaster. One slightly hazy night, one choice to fly visually, one misread horizon. Each link in the chain forged the path to tragedy. What makes Kennedy's final flight so haunting is that it reflects a truth all pilots understand: disorientation doesn't announce itself. It creeps in quietly, subtly, until the world tilts in a way the eyes can't correct and the instruments become your only lifeline. Many pilots have survived such moments only because they were trained to ignore their senses and trust the cold, unfeeling dials before them. Kennedy, like many private pilots, had not yet reached that point in his training where instinct surrenders to instrument. His story, therefore, stands as a timeless lesson in humility, a reminder that the sky, while beautiful, is unforgiving to hesitation and error. In the years since, his crash has inspired safety campaigns, simulator training modules, and documentaries aimed at preventing similar tragedies. His Piper Saratoga, once a symbol of independence, became a case study in how human perception can betray even the most capable and careful among us. And though many remember John F. Kennedy Jr. for his charm and legacy, pilots remember him for something different, for the unseen battle between human instinct and mechanical truth that plays out in cockpits every day. That night over the Atlantic, as the lights of Martha's Vineyard faded into the mist, Kennedy was flying not just into darkness, but into the fragile boundary between confidence and chaos. In that invisible space, countless aviators have found themselves trusting their senses until the ocean or the ground rushed up to remind them that sight, when deceived, can kill. His death didn't just mark a loss for his family or the nation. It became a warning written in water and darkness, urging every pilot who takes off into a hazy night to remember what he could not see, that even the calmest skies can hide the cruelest traps. On the evening of May 31, 2014, at Hanscom Field in Bedford, Massachusetts, a sleek Gulfstream G-IV jet prepared for takeoff, its engines humming with quiet precision and power. On board were 7 people, 2 experienced pilots, a flight attendant, and 4 passengers, including Philadelphia Inquirer co-owner Lewis Katz. The destination was Atlantic City, a short and routine flight for a jet of that size and speed. The night was calm, visibility was clear, and everything appeared routine, but within moments that calm would turn to chaos. What unfolded in the next 30 seconds would expose a chilling truth about human complacency in aviation, a truth that would leave an indelible mark on flight safety. As the Gulfstream G-IV began its takeoff roll, everything seemed normal. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, its engines roaring to full thrust. But something was wrong, fatally wrong, and no one in the cockpit seemed to notice. The control lock, a simple mechanical lever designed to prevent the aircraft's control surfaces from moving while parked, was still engaged. With the gust lock on, the elevators and ailerons were immobilized. This meant that the pilots could not raise the nose for liftoff. Yet the jet kept accelerating, racing down the runway at over 160 knots, burning through precious distance and time. In the cockpit, the pilots would have felt the control column stiff and unresponsive. According to the flight data recorder, they pulled repeatedly on the yoke, but the locked controls refused to budge. The aircraft remained pinned to the runway, hurtling forward like a missile on rails. Only in the final seconds did the crew realize the nightmare that had taken hold. They attempted to abort the takeoff, deploying thrust reversers and slamming on the brakes, but it was too late. The jet overshot the runway, skidding through the grass, tearing through the airport perimeter fence, and slamming into a ravine. Within moments, it burst into flames, the explosion lighting up the night sky and sending a plume of black smoke rising into the darkness. The impact was so violent that emergency responders described the wreckage as unrecognizable. All 7 aboard were killed. The tragedy was instant, total, and entirely preventable. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation would reveal a pattern of negligence so stark that it shocked even veteran investigators. The pilots, both highly experienced and type-rated for the Gulfstream, had failed to perform one of the most basic safety checks in aviation, verifying free and correct movement of flight controls before takeoff. The cockpit voice recorder told a story of routine without vigilance. There was no verbal checklist, no confirmation of control movement, no moment of pause before throttling forward. The data showed that in the last 175 takeoffs the same flight crew had performed, they had skipped that critical pre-takeoff control check almost every single time. It was a ritual of negligence, repeated so often that it had become their normal. The gust lock, designed as a safety feature, became a death trap because of their complacency. When engaged, it should have physically prevented throttle movement beyond a certain point, a mechanical warning to remind the pilot that controls were locked. But the system allowed limited thrust, just enough for a distracted or overconfident crew to begin rolling down the runway without noticing. It wasn't until the aircraft reached takeoff speed that the crew fully realized their mistake. But by then, the forces involved made stopping impossible. The NTSB called it one of the most glaring examples of procedural failure in business aviation history. For investigators, the key question was not how the crash happened, but why such experienced pilots had ignored a fundamental safety step for years. The answer lay in a subtle yet deadly human phenomenon: complacency reinforced by habit. Over time, as flight after flight went smoothly, their confidence in skipping certain steps grew. The checklist, once a sacred ritual of discipline, became optional in their eyes. They had flown this aircraft hundreds of times, often with the same passengers, the same routes, the same outcomes. That predictability bred a false sense of control. It's a psychological trap that haunts many sectors of aviation, when familiarity erodes caution and when nothing bad happens long enough for routine violations to feel safe. The cockpit voice recorder also revealed a lack of effective crew resource management. The first officer never challenged the captain's actions, never cross-verified the checklist, never insisted on physically checking the flight controls. It was a silent cockpit, not because of stress, but because of culture. The captain was dominant, experienced, confident, and the first officer deferred to him completely. In commercial aviation, such hierarchical dynamics have been the root cause of many disasters. But in private and business jets, where small crews operate in less regulated environments, the risk can be even greater. The culture of deference can override safety in the name of convenience or habit. The investigation also uncovered that the aircraft's flight data monitoring system, an onboard feature capable of detecting procedural lapses, had been ignored. Gulfstream's data showed that their jet had been consistently departing without control checks for months, but the operator had no system in place to analyze or act on that information. It was a case study in how safety tools mean nothing without accountability. When the NTSB published its final report, it didn't just list technical findings, it delivered a moral indictment. The probable cause, they stated, was the flight crew's failure to perform a flight control check before takeoff, which resulted in their attempt to take off with the gust lock system. Engaged. Contributing factors included habitual non-compliance with standard operating procedures and inadequate oversight by the aircraft's operator. These were not just procedural errors. They were failures of discipline, culture, and leadership. In the aftermath, Gulfstream Aerospace made significant changes to its design, adding stronger interlocks to prevent throttle advancement when the gust lock was engaged. Regulatory bodies urged operators to reinforce checklist discipline and flight data monitoring practices. The tragedy became a case study in pilot training programs, a grim reminder of how easily professionalism can erode under the weight of routine. For families of the victims, however, these findings brought little comfort. Louis Katz, known for his philanthropy and civic leadership, was mourned by thousands. His death, and that of his friends and crew, was not just a headline, it was a devastating loss that rippled through communities and the aviation industry alike. The crash site at Hanscom Field became a symbol of what happens when familiarity blinds vigilance. In the broader context of aviation history, the Hanscom Field Gulfstream crash underscored a painful truth. Technology can advance, aircraft can evolve, but human behavior remains the most unpredictable variable in flight safety. The G-IV was one of the most sophisticated business jets in the world, equipped with redundant systems, advanced avionics, and precise engineering. Yet all of that technology was rendered useless by the simple act of skipping a checklist, a mistake as old as aviation itself. The pilots didn't suffer from lack of knowledge or skill. They suffered from erosion of discipline. It's a phenomenon known in aviation psychology as normalization of deviance, where small departures from the rules become accepted because nothing bad happens immediately. Each skipped check reinforced the illusion that the rules were optional. By the time catastrophe struck, the deviation had become the norm. The NTSB's findings reverberated through flight departments worldwide. Corporate operators instituted mandatory oversight of cockpit procedures, random audits, and retraining on checklist compliance. Pilots who had once prided themselves on efficiency began re-evaluating what efficiency truly meant. The crash became a stark warning that discipline is not bureaucracy, it's survival. In simulator sessions, instructors recreated the Hanscom Field scenario to test pilot reactions, and many were stunned by how long it took to recognize the gust lock error once the takeoff roll began. The lesson was clear: prevention happens before the throttle is ever pushed forward. In aviation, every disaster is a teacher, and the Hanscom tragedy taught an unforgettable lesson about human complacency. It reminded everyone that aviation safety is built not on heroism, but on humility. The humility to follow the same steps every single time, no matter how experienced or confident one becomes. For pilots, the phrase "controls free and correct" became more than just a checklist line. It became a mantra, a vow to never let habit replace diligence. The crash of the Gulfstream G-IV at Hanscom Field didn't just destroy an aircraft. It shattered the illusion that experience guarantees safety. It showed that even the best trained crews can fall victim to their own patterns, that the most advanced machines are helpless without disciplined minds guiding them. Every rivet, every system, every warning light on that aircraft was designed to protect its occupants, but all of it depended on one simple human act: moving the yoke before takeoff. The failure to do that turned a moment of routine into a moment of horror. Today, when pilots walk around their aircraft in the pre-flight ritual, checking the control surfaces and reciting the checklist aloud, many do so with this story in mind. They remember Hanscom Field, they remember how quickly routine became fatal, and they remember that safety is not a destination, but a discipline. It is the quiet repetition of simple acts, the ones that seem so obvious they're easy to forget, that keeps aircraft from becoming headlines. The Hanscom crash was not a mystery of weather that keeps aircraft from becoming headlines. The Hanscom crash was not a mystery of weather or technology. It was a mirror held up to human nature. It showed how easily comfort can become complacency, how the illusion of control can blind judgment, and how one small oversight can unleash irreversible tragedy. It's a story that still echoes through hangars and training rooms around the world, whispered in the pauses before takeoff. Check the controls, trust the process, never assume. Because in aviation, every time you skip the smallest step, the sky is waiting to remind you why the rules exist in the end. Both of these tragedies, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s fateful flight into darkness and the Gulfstream G-IV's fatal rush down the runway, serve as haunting reminders that aviation is not just about technology. It's about discipline, humility, and respect for the unseen forces that govern the sky. Every checklist ignored, every moment of overconfidence, every small decision made under pressure becomes part of a fragile chain between life and death. The air may seem calm, the instruments steady, but complacency is the silent storm that brings even the most skilled pilots down. These stories are not just about crashes. They are lessons carved in wreckage, warnings written in smoke, reminding us that safety in flight is not found in the machine, but in the unwavering vigilance of the human behind the controls.